Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their timeless and extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are over 180 interviews in this podcast series, all of which you can enjoy on aarecoveryinterviews.com and all podcast apps. My guest on today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews is David D., a man whose story of descent into alcoholism and steady climb back through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous reminds us that no one is immune to the reach of this disease. Born into a relatively normal family and raised in a stable environment, David's early life was free of the turmoil that marks so many stories of addiction. His introduction to drinking came mostly during college, where fraternity life provided both the social setting and the permission to drink freely. In those years, his drinking appeared typical, part of the camaraderie and celebration that define young adulthood. After college, David built a promising law career and enjoyed the outward signs of success. Drinking remained a social habit, something to accompany professional events or ease life's minor stresses. When business setbacks and personal losses began to mount, David found in alcohol the false comfort and control that every alcoholic comes to know all too well. The very solution he trusted soon became the source of his greatest problems. As relationships faltered and opportunities slipped away, his health began to deteriorate. What had once been a coping mechanism became a slow-motion collapse of body and spirit. By early 2016, David's drinking had ravaged his liver and other organs, and the prospect of death was no longer theoretical. It was imminent. In February of that year, at age 66, David finally faced the stark reality of what alcohol was doing to him. He reached out for help and soon found himself in a residential treatment facility, followed by an intensive outpatient program, along with regular attendance at AA meetings. There, among the others who had walked the same road, David discovered the grace and guidance that began to restore him to life. Nearly a decade later, David's story stands as living proof of the hope that resides in our fellowship and the redemptive workings of a higher power. His journey from quiet suffering to purposeful sobriety offers strength and reassurance to anyone still struggling in the shadows. So please enjoy the next hour of AA Recovery Interviews with my good friend and AA brother, David D.
I'm David, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, David. That's the standard response most people give, although sometimes it takes people a little while to get the idea, but that's the way we do it in AA, and we're friendly and nice, and everybody says hello, and it's one of the few places where when you say who you are, everybody says hi back. So I'd like to welcome you to the AA Recovery Interviews podcast. And you and I have been talking about doing this for a while, and it's taken us a little over a few years to finally get it together. But in that time, you've stayed sober, you've continued to go to meetings. And now, how long have you been sober, and what's your sobriety date?
My sobriety date's February the 1st, 2016, so I'm just past 9.5 years.
9.5 years. That's amazing. 9.5 years. When I was new, if somebody had said 9.5 years, it might as well have been about 1 million, but that's truly, truly amazing. 10 years ago, as you were sitting, contemplating your future perhaps, did you ever see yourself a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in the near to distant future?
No, absolutely not. The only thing I knew about alcoholics was that, they lived under bridges and drank out of brown paper bags, and that definitely wasn't me.
Yeah, what an image people have of, it's the under the bridge drinking out of a brown paper bag. That's usually what people think about alcoholics. Now, you've been sober going on 10 years. Was this the first time, this period of sobriety, that you ever tried to get sober, or were there other attempts along the way?
Yes, this was my first attempt, and so far I'm a one-chip wonder, and thank God every day for that.
Well, that's really terrific, especially since you're not a young man right now in the program. How old were you when you decided to get sober?
I got sober at 66 years old.
66. So you may be number two in line of our good friend Lauren, who I think got sober at 67. I think I've probably interviewed a few people who got sober later than that, but that's an entire life to live before getting sober. What do you think when you think about that? I mean, how do you think of your sobriety starting at a much later age than had you started much earlier in life?
Well, I guess my thought on that is that, as we say in the program, I had to hit my bottom before I could accept the fact that I was, in fact, an alcoholic, and it took me that long. I guess I'm a slow learner, although I had people telling me I certainly needed help.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's usually the case. It's a spouse or kids. In your situation, who was telling you that you were over the line when it came to drinking and needed help?
Well, definitely my spouse and my two adult children. And I also had three good friends who I didn't even know were in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my wife was calling on them for support, and they were also visiting with me and encouraging me to seek the help I needed. And of course, my ears were plugged up at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. What were your responses to those people whenever they said, "David, we think you should probably stop drinking"?
I think my response was pretty universal, that I didn't really have a problem. And I can remember one friend in particular, after we visited, I talked with my wife and told her what he had said to me, and I said, "I'm not nearly as bad as that guy."
So your benchmark was other people who were able to drink with impunity.
Absolutely. And those who drank as heavily as I did were the best.
Yeah, so you surrounded yourself with people who drank like you did, so everything seemed to be a new normal, right?
That's pretty much true. Although most of my drinking was done in private. I didn't hang out in bars. As I tell people, drinks were too expensive at bars, so I drank at home, or actually towards the end, I was drinking in my office.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that usually gets to be the case for those of us who, and I know I was kind of a solitary drinker and drug user in the end, and that way you don't have to answer to too many people until they barge into your world and want to help. Sounds like maybe that's what happened with your kids and with your wife.
Yes.
What were they seeing in your behavior during those last few years before you got sober?
Well, one of the complicating factors for me was that I was fighting depression at the same time that I was dealing with alcoholism, and I was on medication for my depression and anxiety. And unfortunately, that being a depressant and then adding alcohol on top of that, another depressant, my life was pretty awful, I have to say. I even got to the point where there were days when I barely got out of bed.
So it was essentially clinical depression treated through medication. Did you do very much talk therapy during that time, or were you counting mostly on the medications?
No, I was in the care of a psychiatrist, and in fact, I continue to be.
Uh-huh. Sounds like very similar story to mine. I've had clinical depression pretty much my whole life, I guess. I always used to call it something else, but I was diagnosed with it probably close to 40 years ago, and it never occurred to me that maybe the clinical depression and the alcohol were taking me down a pretty bad path in life, and that turned out to be true. When you thought about your drinking and the use of the antidepressants, did you ever put two and two together between those?
I would have to say I really didn't until after I got sober and realized what I'd been doing to myself.
Mm-hmm. How about your psychiatrist? What did he ever talk to you about your drinking?
Yes, he was I think, very convinced that I had an alcohol problem and needed help. And at the end, he together with my wife and adult children, kind of conspired to get me to accept the fact that I needed something and to get me to go to treatment.
Was it like an intervention?
I think, yes, there was an intervention, but he was not a part of that intervention. I think he had counseled my wife and kids on how to deal with it and what to do and say and so forth.
Yeah, that's helpful when a practitioner is in line with what needs to be done. I went to a psychologist for a number of years who never really faced me down on my drinking. Mostly what he said was, keep coming back and bring a checkbook. I always did, but
That's right.
He never said anything to me
Howard,
about
I
it.
wanted to tell you that that first intervention, I guess it only worked to the point that I agreed to go to treatment. What didn't happen was that I didn't go to treatment because I wanted to go to treatment. I went to treatment because I wanted to get my family off my back.
Yeah.
And I thought, maybe this will help a little, but I was certainly not committed at that point.
So in your mind, you were thinking about that you would just continue drinking once you went to treatment. You'd get 30 or 60 days worth of treatment, and you'd be fine and good to go afterwards.
I'd be ready to drink like a gentleman.
Yeah, yeah. So you went to treatment. How long did you spend in was it an inpatient?
Yes, for 28 days. Mm-hmm. And then I came back to Houston and went into an intensive outpatient program.
Mm-hmm. So you went to IOP. How long did you do that for?
I think it was at least a month in IOP, and then they had an aftercare program, which I participated in for, I believe, a full year after that. That was only a Saturday morning program.
That's interesting. You went to treatment, inpatient, and then did IOP afterwards to get the family off your back.
Well, let me back up, Howard. There were two situations. I had agreed to go to treatment, and when I went, I was actually, I think you may have heard me say this in meetings, but I was at Intercontinental Airport about to board a plane to head out of town to go to treatment. And I actually lost consciousness on the curb where we were checking bags and wound up in the hospital for what happened was my liver had actually stopped functioning.
Oh, my God.
And so I spent 18 days in the hospital, 14 days in intensive care. A couple of different times they actually thought they were losing me, and one doctor had explained to my wife that she was probably going to have to take care of me the rest of my life because I wouldn't be able to take care of myself. And when I finally came back to my conscious state in that intensive care unit, I would say that is the moment when I surrendered, because I knew I needed help and I needed to go to treatment for me and not just to get my family off my back.
My goodness. So in the chronology of things, when did that happen? Was it before or after the family had faced you down with going to treatment?
It was after in response to the first intervention, I had said I was going to go to treatment, and that's when I was en route to treatment that I had the issue with my liver.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that before, where the individual has problems related to their drinking occur right on the way to treatment. So you went into a hospital. You spent 18 days there. Obviously, you couldn't drink while you were there. Were you drinking right up to the end?
Oh, absolutely. On the day that I was leaving for treatment, I had actually been drinking that morning, and when I was admitted to the hospital, my blood alcohol content was 0.3.
It's amazing that you survived.
Yes, it is. God's grace.
Yeah, what a wake-up call that is. And prior to that happening, were there ever any indications that your liver was being affected either by alcohol or by something that got either brushed off or put off to another time?
I had a doctor who did identify that I might have a liver issue and actually wound up having a liver biopsy. And the doctor who performed that liver biopsy told me afterwards, he said, something's going to get you someday, but I don't think it'll be your liver.
Wow. So that was carte blanche to take off and live your life as an active alcoholic.
Confirmed the fact that I didn't have a problem.
Yeah. How many years was that before you actually got sober?
That was probably 6 or 7 years. At that point, my drinking really was excessive, but not unmanageable, or
Right.
at least in my mind, it was not unmanageable.
Yeah. So you went back to the lifestyle of a alcoholic drinker. Now, you're an attorney by profession, are you not?
Yes, I just retired at the end of 2024.
Wow. So you worked right up to almost 10 years of sobriety. That's pretty incredible. Take me back to what it was like in your family of origin, David. What was there in either your family tree or your immediate family of origin that might have predicted that you would become an alcoholic somewhere down the road? It seems like a long way down the road for you, but what was there in your childhood that may have contributed to that, childhood or adolescence?
I have to say that the answer is really nothing. I was born into a upper middle class family, wonderful, loving parents, great nurturing home environment. Neither of my parents was an alcoholic. My grandfather was not an alcoholic on my dad's side. I didn't know my grandfather on my mother's side, but the closest I could come to alcoholism in my family was a distant aunt and uncle, and then their 2 sons who became alcoholics. But as I sometimes say, I don't have anybody to blame this on but myself.
Well, you'd be the guy that a lot of people envy. I mean, a good childhood, it's not something we hear a lot of when talking with recovering alcoholics. I know in my case, I had a miserable childhood, and that contributed greatly to becoming an alcoholic and drug addict along the way. Adjust my thinking and my way of living to those lifestyles. But whenever I hear somebody having a happy childhood and everything was great growing up, first of all, I have a huge number of questions to ask beyond that, especially for somebody who grew up in such a reasonably normal family. Can I use that as a phrase about you?
I think that's fair to say.
And getting sober later, many years later, one of my guests who you know from one of our meetings, I asked him that question one day. I said, because I was incredulous about it, and always have been. How can someone who had a great childhood turn out to be an alcoholic, maybe an alcoholic of even the worst kind? And I asked him that question, and he said, because he had the same kind of upbringing you did, and it was really, how could you become an alcoholic? He said, I drank too much beer. And it was such a simple, direct, no-nonsense answer that I finally got it, that even those who come from that kind of environment can also become alcoholic. So you went through your childhood and your adolescence did you ever drink prior to, or I should ask, when was the first time you drank with purpose or on your own volition?
I was 17 years old and a senior in high school when I had my first drink.
What were you thinking when you took that drink?
I had been raised without alcohol in my household, so I actually thought that when I took that first drink, it was probably going to knock me all the way across the room because alcohol was such a powerful bad thing.
And it didn't.
That particular time, I had enough to get inebriated. I can tell you that.
Did you black out?
No, but I did back my car into a telephone pole and had to explain that to my parents.
They didn't find out about you being drunk at the time, did they?
No, they didn't. I don't know if they were as we thought at that time, naive enough to not pick up on it, but nobody challenged me on how that happened other than a pure accident.
Yeah, a pure accident, backing into a telephone pole. So I've interviewed quite a number of attorneys for the podcast. I don't know what it is about the legal profession and alcohol that seem to meld together, but for those who didn't start drinking until, let's say, high school or college, it seems like things really ramped up when they got to law school. Can you unpack for us a little bit what high school and then college and then law school were like for you and behavior around drinking?
Sure. After that first experience, I really did not drink for the remainder of my high school time. I grew up in Dallas, graduated from high school there, and then went to the University of Texas. And when I got to college, obviously in my fraternity life, drinking was not only accepted but pretty much promoted.
Right.
And I can remember drinking. I would say at that point still socially. I didn't just drink during the day or drink even every day. Mostly I just did it when I was at social functions.
So you were a member of a fraternity, and you were drinking. Were you living with a fraternity or just on campus? What were your living arrangements?
I lived in the house a couple of years, and then other times I lived in apartments with roommates.
Now, drinking is a decision that we make somewhere along the way. When you did drink, either, let's say, in high school, college, or law school, there was a decision behind that. What was the decision based on for you?
That's an interesting question. I would say maybe two things. It was an accepted thing or even an expected thing to do. And then to some extent to relieve pressure, change my mood, relax.
When you think about all those years later that you finally admitted you were an alcoholic, was there anything that happened during your, let's say, your law school days or college days that you look back on as some sort of initial step into excessive drinking in the future?
I guess I would say that the pressure of my profession led me down a path that probably started the time bomb here. I got into the habit of having a drink every day at, say, 5 o'clock in the afternoon in my office. We even had a firm happy hour every Thursday afternoon, and so that was a license to drink. And and I do believe that was done as a way to relieve stress and pressure, because I will tell you that the practice of law, at least in my experience in a big law firm, is very pressure packed, and there are lots of expectations on you, and it is a challenge to live up to those expectations.
Yeah. I always like to ask, and I've gotten some really brilliant answers, some not so much, but what is there about the legal profession and being an attorney that seems to motivate so many people in that field to drink excessively or actually become alcoholic?
I think that it's an attitude that we work hard and we play hard.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
We can be focused on our profession and we can be very productive and very successful, but then when we shift gears and go to a life outside of the professional life, you attack it with the same degree of vigor.
Did you expect that when you got your law degree and when you passed the bar and when you went to work? Did you anticipate the level of drinking and let's say other behaviors that accompanied working for a major law firm?
I didn't expect it. I really never even thought about it.
So in all of the popular culture around, all the TV shows about lawyers and everything else, the typical, I think, misunderstanding about the legal profession is that every single person in it drinks and they're doing the parties like you're talking about. But that wasn't necessarily the case for you, was it?
I would say that there was never a social gathering of the attorneys without alcohol being part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't a situation where there were obviously people were obviously getting overserved. Most everybody, if they had an issue, they were controlling their issue, at least in that group setting.
Yeah. So let's say there's about, 40 years, 45, almost 50 years being an attorney before the alcoholism really finally caught up with you and stopped you really dead in your tracks, almost literally dead in your tracks. How would you characterize those years? How would you describe those years in any progression either towards alcoholism or maybe the years that went on and the decades that went on had no real connection to alcohol for you? What would you say to that?
I think what triggered my alcoholism, which was probably there for lots of years, but what really got it going was that I had some pretty significant losses in my life, and I didn't know how to deal with those losses. So I was using alcohol as a way to do that. I had health issues starting in 2008 with a hip replacement, another hip replacement in 2012. Those caused me to have to change my lifestyle. I used to be extremely active and was a runner, and I couldn't run anymore. And then in 2014, I had a mitral valve problem that had been diagnosed for a long time, but it progressed to the point that something had to be done about it. So I wound up having open heart surgery to repair my mitral valve and to correct AFib at that same time. And in discussions with my psychiatrist, it's not uncommon for a traumatic experience like that to trigger depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe in my case, that's exactly what happened. And that's when I started using alcohol more and more as a way to deal with that depression and to get out of my, I guess would say that I was absolutely totally mired in self-pity at that point.
Yeah, self-pity is a great trigger to drinking and using, isn't it?
Well, in addition to that dose of mortality with the health issues, I also had some very significant professional setbacks. I had 3 major clients that produced, I would say, 90% of my business. And one of those wound up going into bankruptcy. Another one changed their focus away from the type of practice I had. And a third one needed to redirect his assets away from the oil and gas business. So he sold his business. So I went from being very productive and highly compensated to unacceptably unproductive, and as a result, compensation following accordingly.
How old were you when all that was going on? How far along in your career were you?
Let's see, 2014. I was in my early 60s.
Okay, so it's not all that long ago that happened. And so triggers, what happened to the triggers along the way, though? I mean, if we look at year 10 into your career, year 20, what was happening whenever you had setbacks, either personally or professionally? How were you dealing with those then? And was alcohol a big part or a little part of that?
I think at that point, alcohol was not really a big part of it. I didn't, at least in my mind, I wasn't using alcohol to treat that problem. I guess mainly what I would do, because I always considered myself pretty self-sufficient, I would just double down and work harder to find business to replace the business that was disappearing.
I guess I was more curious about the alcohol use during that time, and was it ramping up or staying steady?
Others observing me might say differently, but I believe that up until probably the time that I had that first hip replacement and started focusing on my mortality, that I was closer to the goal line than to midfield. That hadn't been an issue. I had not been abusing alcohol, I don't believe.
So would it be safe for me to conclude that during the first, let's say, 2/3 of your life, or maybe more, first 3/4 of your life to this point, you were a normal drinker?
I would say that's the case.
Did you have any indications of perhaps not being a normal drinker, and how did you brush those aside over the years?
I don't know that I can identify any indications. Earlier in my life, I would say that I probably was close to a heavy drinker, if not a heavy drinker, for a good bit of time. But the drinking really ramped up consistently with the change in my health issues.
So we're really talking about, let's say, the last 15 or 20 years?
Probably even less than that.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. So your wife and your kids, they had the opportunity to live with and grow up with a father who was a normal drinker, and although it became heavy towards the end, your children were at that point adults, and so it didn't affect their childhoods to any great extent. But when it started to get out of hand, or when you turned the corner from being an alcohol user to abuser, let's say, what signs were there that was taking place in your life? I mean, I get the idea that the triggers had a part to play, but why is it that you turned to alcohol at that point when you hadn't had to do that before?
I think that at that point, the alcohol was actually working to do what I wanted it to do.
Right.
To change my mood, to relieve stress, and as we say, it's definitely a progressive disease, and once I started down that path, I couldn't stop letting alcohol take control of my life.
Yeah. So if we were to take the years up to the point at which you decided you had a problem, and we kind of set them aside and say bravo for not being an alcoholic during those years. And I mean, you might as well right now, David, be a 30-year-old man who got sober 10 years ago in your early 20s, but here you are on the other side of that, and you got sober at, let's say, just the right time, with death looming from the liver and the open heart surgeries and everything else like that. So let's skip ahead to what happened after you went to treatment and your first exposure to Alcoholics Anonymous and what that looked like for you.
Well, I think I benefited greatly from the health scare. That created in me a great sense, a great willingness to change what was going on in my life. And so I came into treatment and after treatment into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous with my ears open and listening to people and doing what people told me to do. And frankly, as you certainly know, if you're willing, the program works.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. So when you were in treatment and also, let's say, in aftercare, what kind of exposure did you have to AA during that period of time? And what were you thinking about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous while you were already in an inpatient program and an IOP? Did you see the two of them coexisting or one replacing the other? What were your thoughts about that?
Well, both of the programs that I participated in had a healthy dose of Alcoholics Anonymous as part of the program. We had, at my inpatient facility, we had at least a couple of on-campus AA meetings a week. There were multiple recovery tracks at that facility, so they also had NA, Narcotics Anonymous, and they had Overeaters Anonymous and so forth meetings. So I got some exposure to that. And then I got even greater exposure when I was in my outpatient program, and we had an AA meeting every day as part of that. So when I finished that and came into the regular Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, it was a pretty easy and smooth transition. I had not gotten a sponsor. I hadn't started working the steps, but I understood what the program was about, and I was willing to let it work in my life. And I'd seen it work in the lives of others. And I guess instead of coming in to the program trying to see how I was different than everybody else, I recognized that I was just another drunk with the rest of these men, and it worked for them. I was going to try to let it work for me.
That's a great attitude to come into the program with. It's been my experience in interacting with the different treatment centers and IOPs by virtue of going to AA meetings at their facilities or with a number of their people being brought in a van or something like that, that there are a certain number of people who are really dedicated to the idea of getting sober in the treatment center and even with the IOP and even with a certain number of AA meetings afterwards, but they still have the mindset of being able to get this out of the way. Let me get sober and clean, and I'll move on. And if I need AA someday, I'll do it. What were your feelings at the time?
Well, I think one of the best things that I did was to follow the suggestion to do 90 meetings in 90 days when I came out of treatment, and or at least after the aftercare program. And in my opinion, the reason for the suggestion of 90 and 90 is that it simply gets you into the habit, and you make AA part of your life. And since I did that, I still have an AA meeting on my calendar every day. I don't make 7 meetings a week, but I pretty consistently do 5 or 6.
That's great. Meeting makers make it, they tell us. And, if nothing else, even if the only reason you go to a meeting is to distract yourself from other behavior, it's still worthwhile. And I've always been a big meeting maker. How long was it before you got a sponsor when you came in, David?
I had probably been out of the outpatient program for probably a month and a half, maybe 2 months. I can remember the exact moment. I had not intended to ask a man to be my sponsor, but I was moved after a meeting and approached a fella and asked him if he would sponsor me, and I'm very grateful that he said yes, because he's been a big part of my recovery.
What kind of program has he led you through? In other words, some sponsors are very hands-on and very assertive with, the literature or the meetings or the study of Big Book and the steps. What sort of sponsor was he in that regard?
Well, I would say that he was a very caring sponsor, and I was fortunate that I got matched up with the right type of person to be my sponsor. I think if I had had a really drill sergeant type sponsor, I might very well have rebelled. But my sponsor was very patient with me, and we were definitely book oriented, big book oriented, and 12 and 12 oriented. And one of the reasons I asked him to be my sponsor was that we had been going to several of the same meetings throughout the week. So I continued, in addition to working with him on the steps, I continued to see him at meetings. And after I got into the rooms of AA, the thing that took over for me was the AA fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
I had not expected that. I really had not. I thought you went to AA meetings and then you went home and you lived your life. Mm. And what happened in my experience is that AA became a big part of my life. And, instead of having to go to meetings, I enjoy and look forward to going to meetings. And in particular, I look forward to social aspects before and after meetings.
Yeah, I think that's the icing on the cake. It always is. At least it's been that way for me. If AA didn't enrich my life, I'd probably be much less active and, inclined to do things with people in the program and stay in touch. So it's wonderful to hear you saying that, because that's a great acknowledgement of the importance of fellowship and the meeting after the meeting. I know I see you in the meeting that we go to, the meetings that we go to every week, and I know you're active with people, with dinner afterwards or coffee before and that sort of thing. To me, when I see a man doing the additional work, which is not really work to me, I mean it's wonderful, but when I see a man doing that, my belief is that his odds of staying sober are probably much better than the man who does come in, sit down, pull out the phone, which is in a lot of ways, I believe, like a do not disturb sign. And I'll ride roughshod over that every day of the week by saying to two guys who have come in, sit down next to each other, they pull out their phones, and I'll walk up to them and I'll say, have you met the guy right next to you? And they haven't met. They're sitting next to each other on their phones, and they haven't even said hello. And that that to me is not true fellowship beyond the placement of two breathing human beings in the same place at the same time.
One thing that I started doing early on, and it has served me well, is that I didn't just turn my phone off or put it on silent. I left my phone in the car.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to do it.
When I first came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I probably approached it the same way that a lot of people do, and that is that I would come in late or right as the meeting started. I'd sit on the back row and I would sprint out of there as fast as I could. Mm-hmm. And luckily I stayed and kept coming back long enough that the meeting started having some real impact on me. Mm-hmm. And my attitude changed, as I said before, from having to go to the meeting to wanting to go to the meeting.
Yeah, that's terrific. And especially with what you went through at the end. As you were in your early years of sobriety, did any of those health issues reemerge in your life?
Thankfully, they have not.
Wow. So you made it into sobriety, and you're in sobriety, and you haven't had any of the mishaps that occurred right before you got into sobriety. That's quite a story, David.
Well, it's amazing how much your health improves when you stop drinking.
I would say so. I guess if everybody had that message firmly in mind, it'd be a much different world. So you're a very highly educated, very experienced person in general, and specifically when it comes to law and what you did for a living. Were there ever times where you questioned any aspects of AA? And I'm talking now specifically about some of the things it says in the Big Book or some of the spiritual directions that the book heads in? Anything that intellect bounced up against in resistance while you've been in the program?
I really don't think so. I was raised in a Christian home. Church was a big part of my life. I accepted Jesus as my Savior when I was probably 11 or 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly didn't stay on the beam in terms of that relationship and periods of time, particularly college and my early years of practicing law. I was not a consistent churchgoer by any means, but I was not turned off by the spiritual components of the program. And I also learned quickly the difference between organized religion and spirituality in the program of AA.
What did you think about the spiritual aspects of the program when you first came in?
I started to realize that that's why the program works. I think I remember when I read There Is a Solution,
Mm-hmm.
it started to dawn on me that made a lot of sense. And one of the major things that AA has done for me is it restored my relationship with my higher power, and it's led to my relationship being totally different than it was before. I think before sobriety and AA, my relationship was that I knew there was a God, and God was there when I found myself in a bind and I needed to call on Him. But now I live a life where God's in my life on a daily, several times a day basis. I feel His presence.
That's wonderful. I know a lot of people really aspire to that. And when you can say that with the kind of confidence that you're saying it, I think it says a lot to just what kind of relationship that is. There's some days I feel like my relationship is a little bit more direct than others.
Mm-hmm.
Some days it feels a little bit vague, a little bit iffy, but for the most part, I know at the end of the day that if I stop and take a look at my spiritual relationship, I very much am a spiritual being having a human relationship. And that human relationship is fraught with all kinds of different things, and it's also blessed with a whole lot of other things. So to me, to hear you say that means that the spiritual aspects and position of the program has definitely infiltrated your psyche.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Tell me about service work now in terms of sponsoring and your participation in other things that might be considered service, not just sponsorship, but, taking the message to other people or just being an example of a well-worked program.
Sure. I've adopted an attitude towards service that service includes a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think many of us immediately go to sponsorship when somebody talks about service. I think that's a major component of it. But to me, service includes showing up at meetings, sharing when you're called on at meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess being a sounding board for other people who are having issues in their life and are willing to seek a little guidance. I know one of the most rewarding things that I've had happen in my sobriety is I had a close friend, a woman,
Mm-hmm.
who asked me about my sobriety and congratulated me on my sobriety, and my response was, "I didn't do this. God did this," and that triggered for her the spiritual component of our program, and it led to her actually stopping drinking herself and getting involved in our program.
That's amazing. Now, did that kind of just pop out without you even being aware that it was going to be said?
Absolutely. I remember I actually pointed up to the sky and said, "I didn't do it. He did it."
That's a good feeling. That's when you know that the program is working you as importantly as you're working it. So I see you at meetings. I see you working the steps. I see you actively involved with people. Is there anything about your background with regard to how long you were a normal drinker and then got sober that you feel perhaps creates any sort of obstacle to people wanting to share the kind of life that you've had, or do you find it's more attractive to them?
I think one of the things that is an obstacle is that I'm an old guy,
Yeah.
and there aren't many people coming into our program at 66 as I did, and my most, I'd say, of my sponsees who have been successful, with the exception of one, they've all been mature men when they came into the program, and so they were able to identify with me for that reason. I think it's hard for a 20 or a 30-year-old to identify with a 76-year-old guy as a sponsor. Now, I've had some people that have come up to me after a meeting in which I shared and follow up on something I said, which I've enjoyed, and I think that's service work also.
Did you ever give that much thought when you went into AA? Like, what happens if this doesn't work?
Wow, that's a good question, and makes me really think. I firmly believe that the compulsion to drink was taken away while I was in that intensive care unit. Because when I became fully conscious, I think I knew at that point that I wasn't going to drink again. I now know that it's a daily issue and that I live every day with a healthy fear of what would happen if I take that first drink. But I've got the tools as a result of our program to hopefully keep that from happening.
Yeah, I get that. Now, your relationship with Jesus and the church in general, in what ways do you see that enhancing your belief in a higher power, just in general, the way we normally think about it versus the organized religion way of thinking about it?
Well, I think one of the things the program has taught me or reinforced is the goal of becoming less self-centered and more God-centered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that happens overnight. It's a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell you exactly where I am on that continuum, but I think I'm moving in the right direction.
You seem very, very well centered in that belief, and the way you've expressed it, I've seen a real change over the years, and I see a man who's working a good program, who's put sobriety at the top of his list of priorities in life, and whose second chance at life after that wake-up call in the intensive care unit was sufficient enough for you to put together almost 10 years of sobriety. I guess it's nothing short of amazing.
It's a miracle.
If you had to speak to a number of people, let's say in your profession, people, let's say in their middle-age years, about drinking and how it affected you, even though you lived for many years without being an alcoholic, what would you say to that gathering of people about alcohol and Alcoholics Anonymous?
I think I would tell them that alcohol use is a slippery slope, and that to be careful and monitor the amount that they're drinking, how often they're drinking. I, like a lot of us in the program, my drinking progressed fairly rapidly to the point that I went from being an evening drinker to a morning drinker and evening drinker to an all-day, 24 hours, 7 days a week drinker, and that's allowing the focus of your life to include a major component of alcohol is how you start down that slope.
Yeah. How has retirement affected all that?
Actually, retirement has enhanced my program because I have more time, less conflicts with getting to meetings. It's enhanced my relationships with my spouse and my adult children and my 5 grandchildren. I am loving retirement and wish I had started it sooner.
Well, it sounds to me the way you're taking care of yourself these days, not only just your health, but your sobriety and your involvement with other people, and the things that you've told me about your spiritual connectedness and your service commitments, and just the degree to which you've immersed yourself in this program, that you probably have a lot of good years to look forward to in sobriety.
I sure hope so.
I get emails from people all over the world telling me specifically who affected them or who they listened to, and it was very impactful. Is there anything that you'd like to say that might have that kind of effect on people out there?
I think I would say what we say at the end of meetings, and that is that it works if you work it.
Bravo. I think that's probably the most impactful thing that can be said is keep coming back, and it keeps working if you work it. Well, I want to thank you so much for doing the interview today, David. It's so good to get to know you better. It's amazing that after all these years, what's really cool about doing these interviews is that I've had the chance to introduce you and your brand of sobriety to the rest of the world, and who knows who it'll help. My belief is if it helps one person stay sober one more day, then you and I have hit a home run. So, again, many, many thanks, David.
Thank you, Howard. I'll see you down the road.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Visit my website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of AA Recovery Interviews. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.